Midnight horror stories. These are the stories people tell quietly, late at night, to the one person they trust. Tonight, you're that person. Turn off the lights. The Handover. I worked in community care for almost 4 years. Home visits, elderly clients mostly, though there were a few younger adults with complex needs on the books. You go in, you do what needs doing, you record your visit on the app, you move on to the next one. A good day is when everything is where you expect it to be, and everyone is how you left them. A bad day is when they're not. And in that job, there are different kinds of bad days. Most of them involve medical situations, a fall, a decline you can see happening week by week, the ordinary grief of watching someone get older faster than they or anyone around them expected. The incident I'm describing isn't that kind of bad day. It's a different kind. My client, I'll call her Edna, which isn't her real name, was in her late 80s. Lived alone in a semi-detached house on a quiet residential street, small garden front and back, net curtains, a cat that had died about 2 years before I started on her caseload, but whose photos were still on the mantelpiece. Sharp as anything mentally, we used to do the crossword together on Fridays, and she was usually faster than me. Physically, she needed help with bathing and dressing and some of the meals. She'd had a couple of falls over the years, and her confidence wasn't quite what it had been. She had a son who visited maybe once a fortnight, a daughter further away who called regularly. She'd been on our books for 3 years by the time this happened. Her visit schedule was 2 a day, morning and evening. I did her evening call, 6 o'clock, most weeknights. I'd been doing it long enough that it had its own routine. She'd be in the sitting room, the television would be on. We'd have a bit of a chat while I got her tea sorted, and then I'd help her get ready for bed, make sure her medication was taken, check the doors and windows were locked, and let myself out. On this particular evening, it was November, a Wednesday, dark by the time I got there. Something was different from the first moment. The curtains were drawn in the sitting room, which was normal, but the television wasn't on. You could see the difference in the light coming through the gap at the curtain edge. No flicker. I noticed it but didn't think much of it. Maybe she was having a nap. I let myself in with my key and called her name. No answer. I went through to the sitting room. She wasn't there. I called again and heard her voice from upstairs. She said she was coming, just a minute. That was fine. She occasionally went up in the afternoon to lie down. I put the kettle on and started sorting her medication for the evening. She came down a few minutes later and she seemed fine. A bit quiet maybe, but she was sometimes on the quieter side. We had tea. I helped her get sorted for bed. Everything was normal. As I was going through the end-of-visit checks, medications taken, stove off, back door locked, I went through to the kitchen. And noticed the back door key was in the outside of the lock rather than the inside. That was the first thing that didn't add up. The back door key lives on a hook inside the kitchen. That's where it always is. That's where she always puts it. For it to be in the outside of the lock, someone would have had to unlock the door from inside, gone out, and locked it again from outside, leaving the key in the lock on the other side. Or, alternatively, someone had come in through the back door from outside using a key. And the key was still in the lock. I turned the key, brought it inside, locked the door properly, and hung it back on the hook. I didn't say anything to Edna. I didn't want to alarm her, and I didn't have a clear sense yet of whether there was anything to be alarmed about. People do leave keys in strange places. She might have gone into the garden at some point during the day and got confused. But She didn't really go into the garden anymore. That was one of the things the morning carer and I had discussed a few weeks earlier. She'd had a near miss on the back step, and we were both encouraging her to use the garden only when one of us was present. And even if she had gone out and come back in, why would the key be on the outside? You'd bring it in with you? I finished the visit, said goodbye to Edna, and sat in my car for a few minutes writing up my notes. I flagged the key in the notes, we have a section for anything unusual, and said I'd mention it to the morning carer. The morning carer called me the next day. She'd arrived at 7 as usual, and Edna had seemed agitated, not distressed exactly, just unsettled. She'd said something about a man in the garden the previous afternoon. That she'd seen someone through the kitchen window, and it had given her a fright. The morning carer had assumed it was confused, thinking Edna was sometimes hazy on specifics in the afternoons, the time of day when she was most tired, and had logged it as a possible episode but hadn't escalated it. When I heard about the man in the garden and thought about the back door key, I rang my supervisor straight away. She took it seriously enough to ring Edna's son, and there was a proper review of the house that afternoon. What they found was this. The window latch in the downstairs bathroom was broken. Not obviously. It looked intact, it sat in the closed position, but when you tried to move it, the mechanism had sheared off inside. The window could be pushed open from outside without any force. That bathroom is on the side return of the house, which you can access through a gate at the side of the property. The gate doesn't lock, it's a simple lift latch. There was no way to know when the latch had broken. It could have been recent. It could have been months earlier. There was no sign of anyone having gone through the window, no marks, nothing disturbed in the bathroom. But the combination of things, the broken latch, the key on the outside of the back door, Edna's account of a man in the garden, meant there was enough to report to the police. They came out. They recorded it, flagged the address for occasional drive-bys, and someone went door to door in the immediate area, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. Nobody had. Or nobody said they had. The bathroom window latch got repaired and they fitted a new bolt on the back gate. Edna's son arranged to have a basic alarm installed. I spoke to Edna directly about it once, about a week later. She was matter-of-fact about it. She'd grown up in a different era, she said, and in her day people dealt with these things. But she did say something that I haven't been able to leave behind since. She said she'd seen the man not just once, but at least twice. That on another afternoon, a few days before the one she'd mentioned, she'd thought she'd seen someone by the back gate. She'd told herself it was a neighbor. She hadn't mentioned it to us because she wasn't sure she'd actually seen anything. She said her eyes weren't what they were. And she didn't want to be a nuisance. She didn't want to be a nuisance. She'd seen someone twice and talked herself out of both times because she didn't want to make a fuss. That broke my heart a little bit, honestly. One of the things about working with elderly people who live alone is that they often downplay things, especially things that frighten them. The instinct is to keep calm, not worry the people around them, not be seen as difficult. So things get minimized. Things don't get said. Nothing was ever definitively established about what had happened or who the man was. The police didn't make an arrest. There was no footage, nothing stolen, nothing that gave them a solid thread to pull. It may have been someone casing the house, those streets, the quiet residential streets full of older people living alone. They do get targeted. It may have been something more random. I don't know. What I think about is the key in the outside of the back door. If someone had used the bathroom window to get into the house while Edna was upstairs resting, they'd have come through the side return, lifted the gate latch, pushed the window, gone in, and then left through the back door. They'd have locked it behind them if they had a key. Or if they'd found her key hanging on the hook and used it to let themselves out the back door and lock it from outside. Edna's key was the original. It had been on that hook for years. If someone had been in the house on one of her quiet afternoon rest times and found it, they'd have had a mold made, or simply taken it and returned it during a later visit. I don't know if that's what happened. I genuinely don't know. It might be a completely ordinary explanation I haven't thought of. But we changed the locks anyway, and I made sure the son knew to check that gate latch was secure going forward. I left that job about a year after this. Nothing to do with this incident specifically. It was the right time. I'd been thinking about it for a while. I moved into a different kind of work. But I still think about Edna. She's still on the books as far as I know. Still doing the crossword. I think about the fact that she didn't want to be a nuisance. That she sat with something frightening and managed it quietly because she didn't want to cause bother. I think about all the evenings I arrived at her house and she was as I expected, sitting room, television, crossword folded on the arm of the chair, and how much of what was happening around her I simply wasn't seeing. The one thing I changed in that job, in the time after that, was that I started asking more directly. Not just running through the checklist. Actually asking, properly, is there anything that's felt strange recently? Anything that's worried you? Anything you weren't sure whether to mention? And being explicit that there was no such thing as being a nuisance. Some of them had things they'd been holding. Small things, usually. Most of them nothing. But not always. The Layby. I drive a lot for work. Have done for about 6 years now. Territory sales, so most weeks I'm covering a region that takes in 4 or 5 different towns, and the roads between them. Motorways, A-roads, stretches of dual carriageway that go on long enough that you stop registering the driving as something you're actively doing. It becomes automatic. You know the roads, you know the junctions, you know how long each leg takes and where the congestion builds up. After enough years, it stops feeling like travel and starts feeling like moving through a space you know by heart. The route I do most often runs from my home city northeast, up through the industrial towns on the edge of the moors, and back down the other side through the market towns and out west again. A big loop. On a good day, it takes about 4.5 hours with stops. I usually leave early, sometimes before 6, because the first 2 calls are early appointments and the roads are better before the commuter traffic gets going. This was about 2 years ago, a Tuesday in late February. Dark when I left, dark for most of the drive up. Dry, though, and clear, which makes a difference on those roads in winter. I'd done my first 2 calls, had a coffee at a service station around 7:30, and was heading back down the western leg. There's a section of dual carriageway on that leg, maybe 25 miles long, that runs through farmland. Flat on both sides, hedgerows, the odd cluster of farm buildings set back from the road. Barely any lighting. You get lorries on it, the occasional early morning driver, but it's quiet for the most part. There are a few places to pull in, Laybys every few miles, the kind that are just a tarmac strip alongside the verge. No facilities, no lighting, just somewhere to stop if you need to. I'd been driving for about 40 minutes since the service station. I wasn't especially tired. I'd slept fine the night before, but I had a slight headache starting, and I wanted to check a message that had come through on my phone. I know you're not supposed to, but it was a client I'd been waiting to hear back from, and I wanted to know if I needed to redirect. So when I saw the lay-by coming up on the left, I indicated and pulled in. There were no other vehicles in the lay-by. I'd half expected a lorry or two. You often find them parked up with the curtains drawn, drivers sleeping off a night shift, but it was empty. Just me. I put on my hazards, unlocked the phone, read the message. It wasn't urgent. I sent a quick reply, put the phone back in the cup holder, and was about to pull away. That's when I noticed the car. There was a vehicle parked at the far end of the lay-by. Set back, close to the hedge, with its lights off. When I'd pulled in, I'd been looking ahead and slightly left to navigate into the space, and the car was at the other end and away from me, and dark enough against the hedge that I'd missed it entirely. But now that I was facing forward, it was visible. Saloon car. Dark-colored, though in the low light I couldn't tell you the exact shade. Could have been navy, could have been dark gray, could have been black. No plates visible from where I was sitting. I sat for a moment. I wasn't alarmed. Cars park in laybys, that's what laybys are for. But I noticed it because of the lights. If your car is parked in a dark lay-by before 9 in the morning with no lights of any kind showing, that's unusual. Most people leave hazards on, or at least side lights. It was off to the side of where my own headlights were pointing, so I couldn't get a clear look at it. Just the shape, the outline, and that was about it. I looked for a few seconds, and then reached for the ignition. Then, the driver's door of the other car opened. Not the whole way. It opened a few inches down and stopped, like someone pushing it open slightly and then pinning. I watched it. It stayed like that, open a crack, not swinging further. No interior light came on, which meant either the light was switched off or the bulb was out, or, and this was the thought that came immediately, the door had been opened just enough to avoid triggering the light. I sat still. I didn't pull away. I don't know exactly why. Partly I think I was just trying to work out what I was looking at, deciding if it was something or nothing. The door stayed open a few inches. I couldn't see anyone in the car from where I was. The angle was wrong, the light was wrong, and the car was far enough away that I couldn't make out any detail. I turned my headlights onto full beam. That lit up the lay-by properly, and I could see the other car more clearly now. Dark blue saloon. Older model, maybe 10, 12 years old. The door was open a crack. And behind the glass, I could see the outline of someone in the driver's seat. They didn't move when I put the beams on. No hand raised against the light. No turning of the head. No reaction at all. Just sitting there. I stayed on full beam for maybe 20 seconds. Nothing. The figure didn't move. The door didn't open further or close. I put the car in gear, pulled out of the lay-by, and got back on the road. I drove for about a minute before I called it in on the non-emergency number. I described the location as best I could, the approximate mileage marker, the direction, and described the vehicle and what I'd seen. The call handler took the details and said they'd pass it on for a patrol to check. I asked if there was anything else I should do, and she said no, just to continue on my way. I don't know what came of that. I never followed it up. I told myself it was probably someone sleeping between shifts, or someone who'd had a medical episode, or some other explanation that involved nothing sinister at all. The door thing bothered me, the fact that it opened slightly and then stopped, but I could make explanations for that too. A latch that doesn't hold properly. Someone half waking up and pushing at the door without fully coming round. These aren't impossible. I know that. But I kept thinking about the no lights and the no movement when I put full beam on them. If you're sleeping in your car and someone pulls up next to you in a dark lay-by and hits full beam, you wake up. You stir. You put your hand up, or you turn away from the light, or you do something. You don't just sit there, completely still, watching them. I mentioned it to a colleague a few days later, just in passing. He said he'd had something similar on a different stretch of road the previous year, a car parked in a lay-by with someone in it, lights off, and he'd had the same feeling of something being slightly wrong without being able to say exactly what it was. He'd driven past and not thought much more about it. He said it had stayed with him, though, in the way these things do. I'm not saying anything happened. I'm not saying I was in danger. I don't know what was in that car or who that person was or why they were sitting there in the dark before 9 a.m. with the door cracked open and no lights on. There's probably a mundane answer. It's the stillness, though. That's what stays with me. I had full beam on them. Bright headlights directly illuminating the car, completely inescapable. And whoever was in that driver's seat did not move at all. Not a flinch. Not a shift. Just sat there and watched me watching them. I called it in. I drove on. That's the right thing to do, and I know it. But there are still mornings on that stretch of road, still early starts, still the same dual carriageway, still the same lay-bys spaced out through the farmland, when I see a car parked up ahead and I find myself checking, before I pull in, whether the lights are on or off, whether there's movement, whether the door is sitting right. I've pulled in somewhere else more than once, when I wasn't sure. I always used to think the risk on those early drives was fatigue. Losing focus on a dark road at 6 a.m, letting the car drift. You learn to manage that. You know the signs. You know when to stop. I still think that's the main thing. I still watch for it. It's just not the only thing I watch for now. The lay-by is still there. I pass it maybe twice a month. Most of the time it's empty. Occasionally there's a lorry or a van, occasionally a car with hazards going and someone leaning against the bonnet on their phone. Normal things. Reasons you stop. I haven't seen the dark blue saloon again. Or at least, I haven't seen one in that lay-by with the lights off and the door cracked open and someone sitting inside it who doesn't move when you put full beam on them. I don't know if that's because it hasn't happened again, or because I've learned to look before I pull in? Probably both. I looked up the Layby on Google Maps when I got home that evening. Tried to get a sense of the geography from the satellite view. It's a straight pull-off from the carriageway. No trees screening it, no dip in the land, nothing around it. If you park at the far end, close to the hedge, you have a clear sightline to the road in both directions. You'd see headlights approaching from a long way off. You'd know well before someone indicated that they were pulling in. I thought about that for a while. The fact that someone in that position would have seen me coming, would have had time to make decisions before I ever arrived. The door cracked open. Was that how they'd been sitting the whole time? Or had something changed when they saw lights approaching? I also thought about why you'd sit in a dark lay-by on a rural dual carriageway at 9 in the morning, with no lights on at all. The innocent answers exist. Someone who'd pulled over feeling unwell, someone sleeping between long-distance shifts, someone making a call in a spot with reception. But those people put their hazards on. Those people react when you light them up with full beam. The platform. I commute by train 4 days a week. Have done for about 3 years now since I changed jobs. An hour each way, sometimes a bit more if there are delays, which there are often enough that I've stopped being surprised by them. I've learned the rhythms of it, which trains are usually crowded and which ones aren't, which carriages tend to be quieter, which platforms run late on a Thursday for no apparent reason. You settle into it. The commute becomes its own kind of routine, one that just sits around the edges of the working day. The late ones are different. When I have to stay past 8, past 9, the train home is a different experience from the morning rush or the early evening crush. The carriages are quieter. The stations are quieter. The people on the platform at 10:30 at night are a different mix than the people at 7:30 in the morning. More people on their own, more people who look tired in a specific worn-out way. I don't mind it. I prefer the quiet. I'd been working late on a Thursday. This was maybe 18 months ago, into October, so the nights were properly dark by the time I was heading home. I'd missed my usual train by about 20 minutes. I'd stopped at the office kitchen to heat something up and misjudged the time, and the next one wasn't for another 45 minutes. Frustrating, but not a disaster. I'd done it before. The station I work near is not a large one. It's on a suburban line, 2 platforms, a small waiting room that's open until about 10, a ticket machine that works maybe 60% of the time. The staff presence drops off in the evenings, and by the time I got there at 9:15, the only person in the ticket office was a single member of staff behind the glass, visibly doing something on a phone. I went through the barrier and out onto my platform. Platform 2. There were a few other people waiting, 3 or 4, spread out along the platform the way people do when they don't know each other, and there's room to put distance between themselves. A woman with a large tote bag near the shelter at the far end, 2 men standing separately, both on their phones, and a teenager sitting on one of the benches with headphones in. I found a spot about midway along and stood. Got my own phone out. The board showed 38 minutes until my train, standard. After about 5 minutes, I became aware of a man at the top of the stairs that lead up from the entrance. He'd come up from the ticket hall and he'd stopped at the top of the stairs, which is an odd place to stop. You come up those stairs onto the platform and you either turn left along the platform or you stand near the top and wait. He was doing neither exactly. He was standing at the top of the stairs but slightly to the right, which put him at the edge of the platform rather than on it, half turned in a way that wasn't quite facing the tracks and wasn't quite facing away. I didn't think much of it, catching his breath maybe, looking at his phone, working out which side of the platform he needed. Normal enough. I went back to what I was doing. Maybe 3 minutes later I glanced up again. He was still in the same position, hadn't moved significantly, still at the top of the stairs, half turned, not looking at a phone anymore. Or if he was, he'd put it away, just standing. I ran through the usual mental shorthand. Some people are odd on train platforms. Some people are nervous travelers. Some people are waiting for someone they're going to meet on the train. None of this meant anything. Then he moved. He walked down the platform, toward me, toward the other waiting passengers, slowly, hands in his jacket pockets. He wasn't looking at the train board, or at his phone, or at anything you'd normally look at when you were trying to work out where to stand. He was looking along the platform. At the people. He stopped about 15 feet away from me, stood. Then he looked at me. Not a glance, not the automatic eye contact and look away that you get when two people are standing nearby and happen to notice each other. He looked directly at me and held it, long enough that I registered it fully and looked back at him and then looked away first. Consciously looked away because the look was long enough that I didn't know what to do with it. He was maybe late 30s, medium build, dark jacket, nothing visually distinctive. There was nothing in his appearance that flagged anything. It was the looking. I moved further down the platform, not quickly, not obviously. I started walking and made it look purposeful, like I'd decided to move closer to the far shelter. I went past the two men on their phones and stopped about 10 meters beyond them, near the yellow line at the platform edge. I didn't look back immediately. I gave it 60 seconds. Then I looked. He'd moved. He was standing where I'd been standing. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was facing the tracks, but he'd moved to exactly the spot I'd vacated. I want to be precise about how far I was now from the other passengers. The woman with the tote bag was still at the far end, maybe 30 meters ahead of me. The two men were behind me, about 10 meters. The teenager was behind them, further back. I'd put distance between myself and the nearest person without thinking carefully about what that meant. And now there was a man standing 15 meters behind me who had followed my movement down the platform. I turned and walked back the way I'd come. Past the two men, past the teenager, up to the far end where the woman with the tote bag was waiting. I stopped near her, not right next to her a few meters away, but within what I'd describe as natural proximity. I looked back along the platform. He was still in the middle, standing, not following, just standing on the platform, like any person waiting for a train. I was doing the same mental exercise I've since heard other people describe when they've been in similar situations, running the loop between this is probably nothing and I'm not imagining this, trying to find the point at which those two conclusions could coexist. You want to find the innocent explanation, because the innocent explanation is almost always the right one. And you feel stupid, really genuinely embarrassed, at the idea of having moved away from someone who turns out to have just been standing on a train platform. But the following of my movement was real. That wasn't interpretation. I'd moved, and he'd moved to where I'd been. The train came about 25 minutes later. I got on through the nearest door and went and sat in a different carriage than the one I usually use, further toward the front. I watched the doors until they closed. He got on. Through the door at the far end of the carriage I'd passed, I could see him through the internal window in the carriage door. He hadn't come into my carriage. He was in the one behind, standing near the door, not sitting. I could see the top half of him through the glass. I moved again. I went through two more carriages toward the front of the train and found a seat in a section with a handful of other passengers. I didn't look back. At my station, I was off the train quickly, through the barrier, out to the car park, into my car. I watched the other doors of the station as people came out. I didn't see him. I waited until the car park had mostly cleared before I drove out. I thought about it for a few days. I went back and forth, as you do, between having correctly identified something wrong and having invented a narrative around a person who was just awkward and tired and standing on a platform. Those things are genuinely hard to separate in the moment and harder to separate in memory. What I came back to each time was this. He moved to where I'd been standing. That's not ambient behavior. That's not coincidence. That's a thing a person chooses to do. I don't use that station after 9 anymore. It's a practical decision. There are usually ways to manage the timing if I'm aware of it early enough, and I've got better at being aware of it. On the occasions I've had to use it late, I've rung my partner from the platform and stayed on the phone until I'm at the car. It's an easy enough adjustment. The commute is still mostly fine, mostly routine. The morning trains are full and loud and ordinary, and most of the people on the late trains are just tired people trying to get home, which is all I am as well. I just pay more attention now to who else is on the platform, where they stop, whether they move when you move. You don't need a reason to move further down a platform. You don't need to justify it to anyone. You just move. I wish I'd moved sooner. There's a particular kind of doubt that comes with situations like this. You want to be sure before you say something to anyone, and the standard for sure keeps shifting, because the behavior is just ambiguous enough. He didn't say anything. He didn't touch me. He didn't follow me onto the train in a way I could prove. He just got on the same train, which is what trains are for. Any individual thing he did had an explanation. It was the accumulation that didn't. I've thought about what I'd have done differently. The main thing is that I wouldn't have moved down the platform away from the other people. That was the instinct, to put distance between myself and the thing that felt wrong. And it was the wrong instinct, because it also put distance between myself and people who were a kind of safety. Moving toward the woman with the tote bag later was the right call. I just should have done it sooner and more decisively. The other thing I'd have done is used my phone, not to call anyone, although that's an option, but to film. If someone is standing 15 feet away looking at you for an extended period on a quiet platform, you have every right to take out your phone and point it in their direction. It changes the dynamic. It creates a record. I didn't think to do it in the moment, but I've thought about it many times since. Nothing came of it. I didn't report it at the time. I didn't have anything concrete, and I wasn't sure I hadn't talked myself into a story. And by the next day, it felt too late and too vague to be worth raising. That's a common pattern, I think. You need distance to know what happened, and by the time you have the distance, you feel like you've missed the window. I still use the same line, still commute the same 4 days a week. The morning trains are fine, full and bright and impersonal in the way busy trains are. It's only the late ones where I notice now, where I do the scan when I reach the platform, the way I didn't used to think to do, checking who's there and where they're standing and whether anything is sitting wrong. Most nights there's nothing to notice. Most nights it's just tired people and lit phone screens and the board counting down to the train. But I do the scan, every time, and I don't move away from the other passengers. Whatever happens, I stay near the other people. That's the rule now.